Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Tonight's class is going to get a Leil Hayam. Leil Hayam, everyone. Tonight is a holy night, the night of Yud Shvat. It's the 75th anniversary of the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, becoming the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, on the first yahrtzeit of his father-in-law, the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who passed away in the year 1950. On the 10th day of Shvat, and tonight, which is the night of the 10th day of Shvat, a year later. So first of all, it's the yahrtzeit of the previous Rebbe, which in the day of a yahrtzeit, one's light and one's power, one's neshama, radiates with enormous strength and enormous power. So it's a very great energy in the world. May we be able to draw down the lights of the great and powerful tzaddik, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, with all that his holy soul was striving for and working for, to the bringing of Moshiach, to lighting up the entire world with God's light. And then his successor, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the seventh Rebbe, who became Rebbe in 75 years, marks a tremendous milestone. And we discussed the concept of the significance of 75 in the 9th class of our Mashiach update. Tonight's class, I didn't call Mashiach update. It's a standalone class. However, this is very much complementing everything we spoke in the earlier 9 classes. So I would recommend, if you come a chance upon this class and you're curious about what we're talking about, I think the previous classes called Mashiach Update 2026 might be an enhancer to appreciate and to understand everything else we're talking about. But anyways, I want to give a Leil Hayam, which is accustomed to drink some kind of a spirit and give blessings. In Judaism, we don't drink a lot, but we do have a Leil Hayam once in a while, and it helps to open up the soul, to bring expansiveness, and to draw down blessings. So with that, there is this blessing that we're bringing down now for everyone, all of you joining the class, all of you listening at a later time, wherever you are, and all of the Jewish people should be blessed, with abundance and light, and everything of your heart and your desires. May Hashem answer all your prayers. Today we're going to have a fascinating class, I believe, on some really gewaldige things. And it's going to be connected, Be'ezrat Hashem, as follows. Number one, tonight is Yud Shvat, which Yud Shvat is the day of the Nasi, the day of the leader of the Jewish people. So we're going to talk about something pertaining the Nasi. The Nasi meaning the king of the Jewish people is called the Nasi. Mashiach is called the Nasi, the great Nasi. So we're going to be speaking about Mashiach. We're going to be speaking about something really unusual that people don't hear about a lot. The estate that is going to be Mashiach's estate, his private estate in the land of Israel, where he is going to live. And there's actually, unknown to most people, a huge portion of the land of Israel that is allotted to be the private estate of Moshiach himself, of the Nasi. That is discussed in the book of Ezekiel, in the book of Yechezkel, in the latter part of the book, from chapter 45 to the end of the book. It talks about the division of the land of Israel. We're going to speak about that in a significant way later on in the class. But tonight I'm talking about it because tonight is the night of the Nasi. We celebrate our Nasi, our leader of our generation, the greatest Jewish leader of our generation, and that's the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and we're therefore commemorating his leadership and speaking about the Nasi and more, Be'ezrat Hashem. This all connects as well to this Torah portion this week, Parshas Beshalach, because in Parshas Beshalach, we will learn about the Exodus and the great miracle, the culmination of the Exodus, which is the splitting of the sea. And by the splitting of the sea, the Jewish people sang a special song. We sang as a people. The Jewish people sang Shira. And in their song, it was not just a song, it was a song that was inspired by prophecy. It was a prophetic song. As the sages tell us, how everybody composed the exact same words at the same time, according at least to one opinion. It was a song that just came out of their mouths. It spans, I don't know how many verses, but probably about 30 verses of the Torah, 20 to 30 or maybe a little more verses of a whole lot of detail. And that those words all came out of the mouths of millions of people, men, women, and children. And the sages say, even the little toddlers and even the little infants who can't even talk were singing, and we're saying these words. Obviously, this is inspired by some type of a prophetic flow that's flowing through them. And according to a statement in the Midrash, even the fetuses inside the mother's wombs were also participating in the song. So obviously this is beyond the human experience. Now that song, which we still say in our prayers every day, this Shabbat, this Shabbos, we will read it in our shuls. But in addition to that, we say it every day in our part of our morning prayers. This song speaks of the Jewish people are singing to their destiny. They're singing to the ultimate. Now, even though it looks like and it appears like they are prophetically speaking of a close events that were going to happen within their lifetime, or at least, if not their lifetime, their children's lifetime, which was to go into the land of Israel. Now, we know that sadly that generation did not merit to make it into the land. They perished in the desert because of the sins of the spies and certain hang-ups that happened. But they went into the land of Israel. But they also sing about quite a future event because they speak about the building of the temple. Now, the building of the temple only happened at about 400 years after they entered the land of Israel. I'm sorry, longer. The building of the temple did not, the first temple of Solomon did not take place till about 800 years. No, I'm wrong. Sorry. Around, I think between 400 and 500 years after they came into the land of Israel. All right, they had the temples of Nov and Givon, first in Gilgal, and then finally, something like about 400 to 500 years. I mentioned the exact number in a class a while ago, but I forgot already. But in any case, so they're singing about, this is prophetically inspired. However, according to the deeper, if you read into the words, according to the sages, they're actually looking farther into history, and they're talking about the final redemption. Because when they speak about the Holy Temple in the song of the sea, when they sang, they weren't only speaking about the temple of the first temple or the second temple. They were talking about the third temple, Beis Hamikdash HaShlishi, that is going to be built by Moshiach. Rashi says it on the words Migdash Hashem Konenu Yadecha, the temple of God that your hands have established. So Rashi says this is referring to a special temple that God himself will build, because the first two temples were built by humans, and as the Zohar says, because it was built by humans, it was destroyed. Anything human has the frailty of humans, has the limitations of a human production. But because God is infinite and he's the only one who can build something with permanence, and therefore the third temple is going to be built by God himself, Konenu Yadecha, that your hands have established. So it's referring to that temple, and that's going to last forever. And that's why we say, continuation to that, the last and final verse of the song, Hashem yimloch la'olam va'ed. God will reign forever and ever. When will God reign forever and ever? From the time of Moshiach. Now, God is king now as well, but he's not necessarily recognized by everybody. When God is openly manifest as a king, then there can only be holiness and goodness in this world. There cannot be any disobedience. There can't be any sinfulness. There definitely can't be atrocities and ugliness when God will manifest his kingship. So that's going to only happen in the days of the Mashiach, which at that time the temple could be built. So here we have the prophecy of, so And the verse also continues, and it says, Tiviemo, you should bring them. Visitaemo, it's not just talking about the third temple. It's talking about God bringing the Jewish people and planting them in the land, Bahar Nachlascha, on the mountain of your inheritance, which is referring to, in general, the land of Israel being given to the Jewish people for an inheritance forever and ever. And that inheritance was not yet fulfilled when we went into the land in the days of Joshua with Yeshua, because that did not last, because the Jews were driven out of the land. In terms of ownership, it was given to us for all of eternity, but no one could take it away. But in terms of practical possession of the land, we were driven out for close to 2,000 years. And it's only recently that Jews came back to the land of Israel. And even now, we don't have the land of Israel in its entirety. And in the time of the complete redemption, may it happen this minute, the land is going to be given to Israel and to the Jewish people in a way that it will never, ever, ever, end. We will live on that land for all of eternity. Comes out that in this week's Torah portion, it is hinting to and speaking of the land of the future. So in that sense, it's going to be connected to what we're going to be the subject of tonight. Fascinating discovery about the division of the land in the time of Moshiach, and Moshiach himself, his private property, his estate at that time. And we're going to find out some really shocking things about where that portion is going to be, the private portion of Moshiach. And believe it or not, if you look at the title, it gives it away. But let's see how we make our way to that conclusion. But before we go into that, I want to connect that to and something really, really awesome, which happened this week. And I don't want anybody to miss the significance of an event that just took place just this week. And that is, an amazing thing happened. If you look, you will see that the leaders in the state of Israel and people all over the world have removed a certain pin that they were wearing. There was a certain pin that was worn by Prime Minister Netanyahu. It was worn by all the Israeli politicians and by many people who wanted to identify with a deep sorrow for the Jewish people. Was they wore the special pin in which was the message of it was bring them home, to bring the hostages home. Sadly, many hostages were taken to Gaza on October 7th, and sadly, many of them didn't make it out alive. And with God's miracles and kindness, many of them were, after going through a hellish nightmare in the dungeons of Gaza, did come out, thank God, alive. I don't remember then right now. I didn't look up the numbers throughout the whole saga that went on in the last 2.5 years. But in addition to that, to the Jewish people, the bodies of the hostages are, and any Jewish body is treated on the highest level of respect and honor. And we want to bring every deceased, especially people who took a bullet for the people. We want to bring them at all costs to Jewish burial. So it was very, very, very painful. A lot of people couldn't understand the extent that the Jewish people would go to for people they don't even know, to extract the body and bring them back. To even, how much people would even risk their lives for this type of thing, to bring these bodies back, to give them their final respects. This has to do a lot with the idea of we appreciating and understanding that the body is of eternity. Even though the body gets put in the ground and it seems to decay and disintegrate, but a fundamental belief in Judaism is the resurrection. And in that, it's not a new body, it's the same exact body, because some bit of the body that only God can see never disintegrates. And from that one cell or whatever it is, one bone or whatever it is, God will reconstruct the body. And therefore, that reason, we want these bodies to be given a proper Jewish burial. That's not to say that those people who, for whatever reason, did not make it to Kever Yisrael, did not make it to a Jewish burial, are not part of the resurrection. It just, let's just put it simple, it makes it easier and more comfortable for the resurrection to happen if the body is placed in the correct manner and the way God instructs us in the Torah, a proper Jewish burial. So we know that just a few months ago, on a very auspicious day called Hoshana Rabbah, which is the last day of the holiday of Sukkot. When I say the last day, we mean the last day of the 7 days of Sukkot, and then it's the last day of the intermediate days, and then followed by, after that, is Simchat Torah, or Shmini Atzeret, which is a secondary holiday. When I mean secondary, means it's a holiday, it's part of Sukkot, but it has its own value. So the day of Hoshana Rabbah, which was the day, now if you remember, October 7th, took place on Shmini Atzeret, which is the Hoshana Rabbah, which is the day after Hoshana Rabbah, the last day of Sukkot. That's when this horrible massacre and abduction of people, of innocent civilians, and taken and dragged and murdered and tortured and put through hell, as we discussed earlier, these people were abducted. So 2 years later, almost, when I say almost, literally to the day, exactly at the conclusion of the 2 years, a day before we reached the second anniversary, we had the biggest miracle. And the miracle was, yes, it was negotiated by President Trump. I'm not going to go into I'm not going to go into my opinions or not, whether opinions on whether what Israel had to concede in these negotiations to the Hamas murderers, if that was the right thing to do or not. That's not the subject of this class. But bottom line is that on that day, 20 living hostages were released. And we gave a class about that, the significance of that, of these 20 hostages that were taken out on the day of Hoshana Rabbah. Now, at that time, Hamas had also promised to give back all the deceased hostages, that they had been keeping them, many of them who died in captivity, and many of them were dragged into Gaza already deceased. Because these murderers, they know how much the Jewish people cherish their bodies. And for that, by taking them as hostages, it kind of adds for them as a kind of a leverage, gives them leverage, for negotiations. In their sick world, that's what they want to take for leverage, dead Jewish bodies. So they can use that as a negotiation thing. In any case, on that day of Hoshana Rabbah, these hostages came back. And not on that day itself, but on the consequential following days, because Hamas had made a commitment in order to establish a ceasefire or whatever else, that they would return the other bodies. So they were supposed to return it, I think, within 3 days or a few days or within a week, because they said they have to locate the bodies. But they started making all kinds of monkey business and all kinds of excuses. And even the bodies that came back later and with much anguish and with much torture to the families. But finally, they gave back all of the hostages. They even returned hostages that they held for from before the war of October 7th, going back to 2014. Everything was returned. But there was one hostage they were holding on to. One soldier that was killed in the firefight on October 7th. Ron Givili was his name. And he was the last one. And it was just 2 days ago, which miraculously, the big miracle happened. Not Tuesday, what's today? Today, Monday, I think it was Monday morning. Or that the final hostage, that is, Israeli soldiers went in through an interrogation of interrogating a Hamas operative. The Shin Bet got information from him on where this hostage might be buried. And they went in there and they had to examine as I heard, 250 bodies until they were able to identify. They had to extract 250 bodies and did some DNA testing, or I don't know how they did this all, or maybe they were able to look at that. I don't know exactly what condition these bodies were in the cemetery there, but until they went through it, until they found their beloved, the beloved of Israel, and they brought this soldier back to proper burial. With this, a painful wound in the Jewish people, a certain closure came. But what I want to speak about is the spiritual dynamics of this thing, because it's not just a little event. This has huge, huge, huge spiritual significance, and particularly regarding the spiritual dynamics of redemption and why it happened exactly this week, and what's its significance in terms of the redemption process that's taking place. One thing immediately I'd like to bring to attention, those of you that were following the earlier classes, a very significant number that we spoke about in the 9 classes, in the earlier classes, was the number 250. Because we spoke about how this year is 250th anniversary to the birthday of the United States of America. And I also mentioned over there that it's 250 years since Chabad bought its first real estate. Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi established the first Chabad center, which I told you then is related to the kingship, the restoration of the kingship of Malchus Beis David, of the kingdom of the house of David. And we discussed it in 9 classes. You can listen to them at great length with all the explanation and all the gewaldige ideas, all the awesome ideas. We were running parallel 250. And then I mentioned this verse. I said it's connected to the verse. And again, this is my own thought, that it's connected to the verse where it says in Psalms, Arachti ner lemashichi. God said, I have prepared a ner, I have prepared a lamp for my Mashiach. So the preparation of the lamp for Mashiach is twofold. First of all, the lights of Chassidus, which are shining so brightly tonight, because tonight we usher in the 6th generation of Chassidus is commemorated together with the 7th generation, which is our generation. So the lights of Chassidus are here in the world to illuminate the world and prepare the world for the anointed one, for Mashiach. Anachti ner equals 250. This particular hostage, who is the last of the hostages, his name is the same like Ner. His Hebrew name is the same like Ner, which is 250, just in the reverse. His name is Ran, Reish Nun. Ran, which means song, but it's also the same letters as Ner, which is 250. And what I heard, again, this has to be verified, but someone posted this today, and I don't think someone would make this up, unless, I don't know, there's all kinds of strange people in the world, but I don't think someone would make this up. That they spoke to the dad of Ron, and he said an interesting thing, as I mentioned earlier, that they inspected 249 bodies before they got to the 250th body, which the 250th was Ron, which his name equals 250. So that's not a coincidence. So here the number 250 comes very it's like the energy of 250 this year is something very powerful, a quarter of a millennium. Very, very powerful time. Now, okay, it's a deceased person who died a noble, heroic death for the sanctification of God's name, because when you're dying to protect innocent lives and the lives of his brothers and sisters, so this was a noble death for the sanctification of Hashem's name. He died as a Jew because he was a Jew. And that itself has unimaginable significance. But I'd like to add something deeper to this. I believe that this event is the completion of an extraction of sparks of holiness that needed to be extracted for the final redemption to be able to come. I know that I might be challenged by the Chabadniks who might argue the Rebbe said already we finished the extraction. Of course we finished the extraction. So first of all, I think we can differentiate between what's called, the Rebbe said we finished the birur hanitzutzes. Avodas habirurim is over. We finished the avoda of separating the good from the evil in the world. But there's two parts to nitzutzes, to sparks. One is to separate the good from the evil, and the other one is to lift up the sparks. So I think the Rebbe's terminology was birurim, the birur. Doesn't mean the sparks were completely elevated yet. And so there's another inyan with aliyas hanitzutzes, the elevation of the sparks. That's number one. And number two, the sparks are separated, but it does not mean that the klipah could not come in, God forbid, which it seems clearly that this was the intention, for one last final grab of sparks of holiness. So this I discussed already in many classes since October 7th, that it seems like, again, from my own small little mind, again, I'm not, saying anything definite, but based on all the Hasidic ideas that I've studied and learned, I'm sharing with you what inspires me. So, and this is good news and happy news, and you might find this meaningful to you. There is a cosmic clash and tug of war that spans the all of history, in where there's a great fight over sparks. What does that mean? God is the reality of everything, and without the divine invested in something, then that thing cannot exist. God is the life force of everything. I'm going to give a very brief explanation for very deep concepts. God, his wish and his desire is to enliven what is good and what is holy and what is beautiful and what serves his interest. That which is ugly and dark and evil, God has no interest in enlivening it. So the question is, how are they sustained? Obviously, God must invest in them. So it's explained that they are enlivened by fallen sparks of holiness. Now, there's a certain measure of sparks of holiness, a certain deposit that God deposited into their realm to give them life. I'm talking about the entire realm of darkness, the entire satanic force in the world, the entire force of evil in the world, which has all kinds of different manifestations and different faces to it throughout all of history. So they're given a certain cachet of sparks. And the way God gives it to them is through a cosmic event, that happened at the beginning or before creation actually happened, and it's called the shattering of the vessels. And that shattering of the vessels caused a bag, so to speak, let's look at it as a bag of sparks, to fall far, 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 a sum total of 288 sparks of holiness, which falls deeply into the realms of the klipot, into the realms of the unholy. And that's what sustains them. That's what gives them life. Being that God wants us to clean the world up, and that which is unholy in this world should one of two things. Either it should be obliterated and removed and wiped away from the world. What means it should lose its life. It should lose its existence. Or certain parts of it should be elevated and converted to goodness. And that gives tremendous pleasure to God, that when we take something evil and dark and unholy and transform it to goodness and to holiness. So therefore, part of our work is accessing these sparks of holiness and retrieving them and bringing them into the holy. And that is, according to the mystics, one of the primary roles of the Jewish people in general in this world, and primarily during the long periods of exile. The long periods of exile in which the Jewish people are driven out of their land. We don't live in our own home, but rather we wander amongst the nations. It's all for the rectification of these sparks. So we can come face to face with these sparks, connect them, elevate them, make these sparks shine forth in their godly state, crack the shells, the klipot, these dark elements that are holding on to the sparks, and break these shells and cause these shells to disintegrate and disappear, because once we access the spark and take it out, or to illuminate the shell itself, and the shell itself becomes elevated with the spark, becomes included in the spark, and it becomes holy and godly and ready to be a recipient to receive Mashiach's light at the time of redemption. So this is this long process called this process of elevating sparks. Now, here is another very important point. The klipah, the unholy, knows that its life force is dependent on these sparks. Therefore, they're going to do two things. Number one, they're going to defend these sparks with all that they've got, that these sparks should not be extracted from them, because that really means an end to their existence. The second thing they're going to do, if the forces of holiness are going to attempt to enter into the zone of the impure and extract these sparks, what's going to happen is the unholy is going to try to do the exact same thing, not only to protect the sparks that they have, but to grab more pieces of holy into the unholy. In other words, being that they're now in contact with an entity, a being, a soul of light, they're going to try to plug into that soul of light and siphon some more energy. So not only are we not going to get those sparks that they have, but they're going to actually gain, God forbid, and the unholy is going to become far more powerful than they were before. So this is what I mean, a tug of war. Israel and the Jewish people, and in general, the forces of holiness in this world, are constantly seeking to enter into the realm of the unholy, to extract and liberate the captives that are there, which are the sparks of holiness that are stuck in the klipah. That's number one. The unholy, not only do they want to protect their sparks, but in addition to that, are always seeking to increase their treasure, to steal more of what doesn't. And how do they steal? They infiltrate holiness by getting someone that is holy and godly to do a sin. When a person does a sin, the forces of unholiness get access into that person's soul and is able to suck up the life force and pull it into the unholy. So this is the constant struggle of good and evil. If we are to go beneath the surface, if we're to enter into the realm of energy and life force, not in the end on the external element, but to look deeper into the deeper divine aspects of existence, this is where the main battle takes place. Based on that, I'm going to cut to the point now, although we're going to come back to this discussion soon. Based on that, we can understand that the time of the redemption, the time of the coming of Moshiach, is when all the sparks of holiness have already been extracted. The Geulah can only come when evil has no more energy to live on. Because one of the promises of redemption is that the forces of evil are going to collapse like a piñata. There's nothing there. It's just going to fall apart without any life to it, because holiness has extracted every bit of sparks. That's according to the teachings of Kabbalah of what's the end game. The unholy will lose all its power on those sparks of holiness. Kedusha, the forces of holiness, will gain those sparks. But will lead us to the understanding of, which I mentioned about October 7th. Because the moment we finally reach the extraction and the excavation and the unholy realizes that it's not, that its days are numbered, literally, that their expiration date is arriving very, very quickly, and they're about to implode on themselves without anything there, and be exposed as a pure heap of lies without any substance at all. So what they need in order to protect them is to make a last and final grab. And part of as we said, they can steal spiritual energies through making people sin and things like that. But a more tangible grab is to actually grab, literally, physically, human beings and grab holy souls. And they do that by grabbing Jews, because a Jew is a super spark. Every Jew is a super spark. A Jew is literally, his soul is a piece of God from above, transcending all of creation. And that explains why Jews are so powerful in this world. So for that reason, we can understand that the battle on October 7th, which the Hamas themselves labeled it the Al-Aqsa campaign, whatever word they used for it, which means it was all about them realizing that they're losing control of the Temple Mount, because very soon the mosque is going to be removed and the third temple is going to be placed on its rightful place. So in this fear, they recognize, whether consciously or subconsciously, that the end of all unholiness is very close. So in order to give them an extension of life, an extension of existence, it helps if they can take a hold of a whole bunch of Jews. So that was the reason that's a possible explanation, and a very, very plausible and reasonable explanation for this idea of going in and grabbing captives on Simchat Torah. And again, this is like a last and final grab. Now, it's not only the living Jews that they want. You see how much they were insisting on holding on. Even after they released the living hostages, they were playing such games and not willing to relinquish the dead one, the deceased. Now that's the question is, well, what's that? There's no one alive there anymore. What's the value of a dead corpse? God forbid. And the answer is, the holiness of the Jew is not only in the soul, but also in the body. And from the Hasidic perspective, based on the ideas we discussed in our 9-class series of Mashiach Update 2026, especially the concepts that we spoke about, the winter Mashiach, in which we spoke about the importance of the sublimation of the lower and the most physical element of existence, the body more than the soul. As we discussed, the body enjoys the body in the winter. We discussed the whole concept of Tevet, referencing back to the classes that we learned earlier. We can understand that there's actually something greater in the body than even in the soul. That doesn't mean that when a person is alive with the soul, it's less than being good. But it just tells you the value of the body, that even though maybe most people who didn't learn the teachings of Chassidus, obviously, perhaps have never been exposed to, and definitely Hamasniks have not been exposed to it, but it's not them who are calling the shots. It's their spiritual source above. It's the Satan, it's the Satan himself who's calling the shots and telling and imploring them to hold on to these bodies. The fact that 2 days ago they relinquished the last body, to me, says something crazy and like awesome. They could not anymore hold on to a body. They released the last spark, which basically means there's nothing left there. Think about Iran about to collapse. Think about tonight, Trump might attack Iran and topple the whole thing. I don't know. We know it can happen any moment. We know the whole axis of evil is falling apart. But today, it's different than it was 2 days ago. Because 2 days ago, they were still holding on to something. They released They didn't release it with choice. It was taken from them. The last one. And what's really amazing is, Netanyahu, I think, said this. This is the first time since 2014 that there's not one hostage in Gaza, including deceased, because from 20 and 14 they always had somebody. Now there is literally, it's like it says this week in the Parsha that the Jewish people went out of Egypt and emptied it out, that there isn't even, they made it like a net without a fish. Now Gaza is empty. Nada. There's nothing there. So what I'm saying is the physical story is symbolic of something much deeper. And all of this happens before Yud Shvat. 75th anniversary, the time for the Shekhinah to completely go out of exile, which we discussed. Abraham was 75 years when he went out of Haran, when he went out of exile. This is today. That happened within 2 days before this. Now, to spice this up and make this so crazy, it's again connected to this week's Torah portion. In the beginning of the Torah portion, it says that Yosef, that when the Jews left Egypt, they had one last item they needed to take. They were going out loaded with wealth. All the wealth of Egypt they took. Because God made the Jewish people go out and ask their neighbors and friends to borrow their jewelry and their gold and their whatever. And they gave them all their possessions. And the Jewish people literally emptied out the wealth of Egypt. That's what God promised Abraham. Which, by the way, is also speaking to the same concept that we were talking earlier. Why is God so obsessed with it? If God wants to make them wealthy, he has to take the Egyptian wealth. He can drop them chests of gold from the sky and diamonds. Why do we have to take the gold of Egypt? It doesn't even look so nice. We borrowed it. We never gave it back to them. Okay, they owed it to us because they never paid us for the labor, for thousands of years of labor. Not thousands of years, of 210 years of labor. So they have to pay. And they paid. Fine. But why is there such an insistence? And it's not just an insistence that God says to Moses. God already said it to Abraham when he tells him, forecasting the exile the first time. God already tells him that when they will go out with great wealth. And the answer is, in that wealth that they took from Egypt was laid all those sparks of holiness. The tremendous amount of sparks. And most of the sparks of holiness were in Egypt. In other words, what we said earlier, that in the beginning of creation, God kind of lost, on purposely he lost, 288 sparks in which he dropped. And they become the life force of evil and darkness. The 288 sparks that need to be redeemed, that need to be rescued. So out of those 288, the majority of them were deposited in Egypt, in the Nile River. And that's why the Nile River was the source of all the success of Egypt. And the Nile River was also a deity for the Egyptians, because all that power was in the Nile River. And that gave them all the wealth, because the irrigation, they always were able to this, and they were very good in farming, and they supplied food for that whole dry area. And from there, from the food, they were able to translate that into wealth, and wealth turns into gold and to silver. And plus, in the Nile itself, there's a lot of gold. As the verse says in Genesis, when it discusses the 4 rivers, it speaks about the river Pisha, which is the Nile River, and it says, Kisham Hazav, over there is the gold, V'abdolach, and the crystal. It's not just talking about physical gold as well, but it's all because of those sparks that were there. And that's why they had to take out this wealth. But even after the Jewish people took out the entire wealth of Egypt, which was the whole purpose they went in there to begin with, there's one last thing they need to go get. I'm not going to call it a thing, but I called it a thing. Moses is running around in a haste. He has to find Yosef's bones. He has to find Yosef's bones. Now, what do you think? Is that the interesting coincidence that this week we bring back the last bones of someone who was buried in Gaza? And the Jews that were in the Torah portion were reading about the bones of Joseph that need to come out of Egypt. Now, it says an interesting thing. It says that Moshe couldn't find the bones of Joseph. Why is Moshe looking for the bones? Because Joseph placed an oath on the Jewish people that you will not leave Egypt without my bones. You must come and find me. So why couldn't they just go to the nice Jewish cemetery and pull Yosef's bones? The answer was because the Egyptians went and they knew that the Jewish redemption is going to require that they will only be able to leave Egypt. The exodus of Egypt is going to involve taking these bones. So what did they do? They put them into a metal steel casket and they cast it into the Nile River. And because it was so heavy, you couldn't bring it up. How are you going to bring up this heavy steel casket? Deep in the... First of all, no one knew where even. So Moshe is looking around and he's seeking, and finally he finds an old lady who tells him where it is. The daughter of Usher, her name was Serach. She was one of the girls who went down to Egypt 210 years earlier. She lived at that time. She was an old lady, at least 210. She was older already because she played the harp for Jacob, letting Jacob know that Yosef is alive. So she must have been at least 7-8 years old when she was playing the music for Jacob. So let's imagine that. So she's probably about at least between 210 and 220 years old at that time, maybe a little older. So Moshe finds Sarah and he asks her, and she says she's supposed to be the keeper of the secret. And he asked her, where is and she points to him where it is. And Moshe was not going to call a towing company and divers to somehow hook up or whatever and to pull up the shipwreck. Instead, Moshe writes a special Kabbalistic charm, a piece of paper, an amulet, you might say, and throws it into the water. Over there it says, rise ox, alei shore, rise ox. Joseph is compared to an ox. He throws it into the water, and suddenly Joseph's coffin comes riding up, the steel coffin with his bones. And Moshe takes it out. So let me read a little bit deeper. What's the deeper story of the Egyptians holding on to Yosef's bones? It's not just because it's technical. The Jews can't leave without the bones. Like this, they're going to have to stay here. No, it relates to exactly what we were talking about earlier. It's hostage taking. The Egyptians were the first ones to take a corpse hostage. And who did they take? They took Joseph, and they took him into captivity. They already took him into captivity when he was alive. Right when he came down to Egypt, they came up with a libel and threw him in a dungeon. And that's really where this story begins. It's actually literally this story that we're talking about. See, you realize the first great confrontation of extraction of sparks of holiness, where the holy and the unholy are going at each other, locking horns and going at each other, each one trying to take from the other, the holy trying to extract the life force of the unholy trying to increase its power by grabbing hostages from holiness into their domain. Where does it all begin? When the first Jew comes down to Egypt. It actually begins even before the first Jew as the Egyptian exile. It begins with the mother of all the Jewish people, our mother Sarah. When they visited Egypt the first time, an abduction takes place immediately. Abraham tries to hide his wife in a box, but they open the box and they find her and they whisk her off to Pharaoh. This was not just, of course, the external story. The outside story is Pharaoh is a lustful individual who wants to lay his hands on every beautiful woman. And Sarah is incomparably in her beauty, so he wants to take her away. That's the external story. What's the internal story? It's not Paro making the decisions. It's the minister of Pharaoh in heaven that is saying, hey, if you can only get that woman, and she personifies the Shekhinah, the divine presence in this world, it's all in Sarah's soul. If you take Sarah into captivity, you've gotten a chunk of life. Take her as into the hands of Egypt and defile her, then you'll have now wealth and enormous power and strength. It'll give you a kingship for eternity. But we know that didn't work well, because the angel came and whipped Pharaoh to submission very quickly, and Sarah was returned the next morning, and Pharaoh could not touch her. But this served as a little sign of what kind of ferocious battle was going to take place. But that's the story of the patriarchs, the fathers and the mothers, which is not yet the story. That's like a preview. The real battlefield, the real actual fight begins with the Jewish people coming to Egypt. And who was the trailblazer in that descent? It was Joseph. So Joseph is the first one to make his way down to Mitzrayim. As soon as he comes, the seduction begins. What did they tell you? What did we learn earlier? How does the unholy try to get into the soul of holiness, to drain its spiritual energies and pull that in? It needs to get the holiness to fall and to sin. So therefore, the wife of Potiphar, the mistress of Joseph, begins to employ every type of all of her powers to try to weaken him spiritually and get him to fall for her and sin with her. Had Yosef slept with her, he would have literally bared his soul into her and given her all that energy, and Egypt would have been unbelievably strong. Yosef even means an addition. Yosef's neshama has all the infinite added light. Yosef, more than what creation has. It's like powerful soul. And they want to get a hold of him. Yosef, with powers that are beyond we can even imagine, is able to resist her. He doesn't sin with her. But they can't take him spiritually, they try to take him physically. So the libel continues, and they drag him into a dungeon. And they keep him there for 10 years. And his sentence was supposed to be 10 years. Then he seeks the help of a human being. Then he seeks the help of a human being. And he forfeits. He forfeits his exit, that we're supposed to exit after 10 years, and God gives him another 2 years in prison. Now, I want you to follow this. So we'll come back to, remember the 2 years in a moment. Remember those 2 years. But in the end, Yosef comes out. When Joseph gets out of jail, because he didn't sin, they tried to hold him, they tried to take him, they can't because they have no power over him. He gets out of prison, and what happens to him? The exact opposite. He now he becomes the ruler of Egypt, and he takes all of their wealth to himself. He brings it first to Pharaoh. First of all, he has to take the wealth away from all the individual people and bring it to the government. So he manages to do that because he brings it to Pharaoh. Because through the famine and the whole everybody paying, so now everything is collected in one place. And later when the Jews will go out, they will take it all out. You see how this is all being planned from above, how this extraction, they want to get him. Now, interesting, once this dynamic has been set up and Yosef has kind of already positioned himself to be above Egypt and have mastery over them, he actually had them all as his servants to Pharaoh, but he was in charge over them. Right after that, his brothers can now come down to Egypt. And all the 70, the rest of the 70, the clan of 70 can come down. And what's going to be their job? Their job is going to be really just clean up. Yosef is the one who did the main work, and now they're just going to do all the cleanup to fix and finalize all the sparks of holiness and gather it all together, and out they will go. How many sparks did they collect from Egypt? So the Kabbalists tell us they collected 202 sparks. There was nothing left because that's all that was there in Egypt, 202 of these divine sparks. Once they elevated these 202 sparks, now these sparks, because they're so holy and so powerful, when you elevate them and bring them back to their source, they cause an enormous download from above, and that was the download of the Torah. All the holiness we have and all the godly enlightenment we have until Moshiach comes, it's all from those 202 sparks. You remember how many sparks were left over? Now, where do we know 202? Well, that's what it says. When they left Egypt, it says, Vigam Erev Rav, and also a great mixture of nations, of people came along with them. The simple meaning is that non-Egyptians joined along with the Jewish people. They semi-converted, and they joined along in the Exodus. They wanted to become part of this amazing nation. But the Kabbalists explain when it says this mixture of Rav is Reish Beis, it's 202. 202 sparks were elevated. It also hints to it earlier when Joseph gathers the sparks. It says Vayitzpar Yosef bar, and Yosef gathered when he was gathering the grain during the 7 years of plenty. It says that Yosef gathers bar. Bar means grain, but in numerology, bar equals Reish Beis 202. So this is already indicating that Yosef is already laying his hands on the 202 sparks, which later, after 210 years, the Jewish people were able to take out when they went out of Egypt. Now, if you remember, how many sparks are left over? 86. The 86 sparks, which are not part of the 282, the reason they didn't take those 86 because they were not in Egypt. Where are those sparks? In China, in Korea, in Europe, in North America, in South America, all over the rest of the world. In Babylonia, in the Middle East, all places besides Egypt. Why only 86? I don't know the secret of the numbers. By the way, it's very important to note when we speak about 86 sparks or 202, doesn't sound like a lot. Each one of these sparks translates into billions of sparks. These are like super spark, which really have like offshoots. So it's really billions of billions, but the 202 were the super sparks that they took out of Egypt, leaving you at 86 to be done and cleaned up in all the rest of the exiles. Over 2,000 years of exile, including the Babylonian exile and this exile, over 2,000 years where we're collecting those 86 sparks. Now, doesn't it make any sense that when we come to the year 5786, Pei Vav this year, we will finish the final spark? Are you going to be upset at me if I suggest that we finished that last spark 2 days ago? Is that such a horrible thing to say? Can anybody handle it? That the last spark was shoveled up and brought. Now, further this. Let's see what happens. Joseph is the one who really pulls all those sparks out of Egypt. Now we can understand why the Egyptians so badly wanted to hold Joseph in captivity. Because you realize he's the ultimate vacuum cleaner. He's pulling all the sparks into him. They want to hold on to the sparks. How are they going to hold on to Yosef? If they keep his bones, and where do they put him? In the Nile. Because that's where the sparks were to begin with. The whole power of Egypt came from the Nile. We took it from the Nile. So they bring Yosef and they put him back in the Nile. And by the way, Yosef is the nucleus of the Jewish people. We once spoke that the Jewish people during the time of exile are called Joseph. The name of Israel during the time of exile is Joseph. So Yosef is the nucleus of the Jewish people. So what happens to Yosef happens to the Jewish people. The tug of war on Yosef is the same tug of war happens to the rest of the people. So what happens? The Jewish people go down to Egypt, and what happens? Egypt immediately wants to do what they did to Yosef, they want to do to Israel. They take them into the pit. Just like Yosef was thrown into a dungeon. They take the Jewish people in the pit, which meant for 210 years of slavery. They enslave them. Working, and basically take possession of them. Why? Same idea. These are the people who have the super atomic energy. If we get a hold of them, we have this powerful godly energy inside us. It will make us unbeatable. What they don't realize, you can make a movie out of this, is that every single Jew, if they swallow the Jewish people inside of them, the Jewish people are vacuum cleaners inside their stomachs. In other words, when you swallow the pill, when they take Israel into their possession, then what gives us access to the innards of the Egyptian world to make our way and access all the sparks and eat it up from the inside out. So the last thing you want to do is eat a Jewish soul and put it into your possession, because it will eat you up from the inside out. And that's God's funny trick. That he plays with the dark side, with the unholy side. And it works on a private scale as well. Every time your an evil inclination, the Satan, which is Satan, gets a person to sin, he swallows that soul. But you know what happens eventually? Because after we sin, we're so miserable, we do tshuva from the belly of the klipah, from the belly of the unholy. And by doing tshuva, we eat away at the snake. We eat it up completely till there's nothing left. And then all that dark energy converts to holiness. Same idea. Now, it's interesting. We once discussed this, but these are fascinating ideas, and this is unbelievable how it all comes together with what's happening now. So what happens? Follow this. So they're trying to drag Israel into their darkness, into Egypt by enslaving them. What are the Jewish people busy doing in order to extract the sparks of Egypt? Having babies while they are in the Egyptian land. Every time the Jewish man and woman brought another child into the world, that was an extraction of a holy spark buried in the Egyptian demon, the satanic world of Egypt, extracting their energy, and this became a Jewish child, born as a Jewish child. That was the redemption of sparks. That's why we find when the Torah says the Jewish people went, now everything makes sense. Now when the Torah tells us the Jewish people came down to Egypt, the one story the Torah starts telling us about is that the Jewish people were having so many children. The whole introduction to how the exile began, it's all because Pharaoh panics that the Jewish people are multiplying and they're becoming so why not kick them out? Instead of kicking them out, what does he do? He should drive them out. If he's afraid that they're going to overpopulate, he should tell them, I'm sorry, you overstayed your stay. Go back to where you came from. He doesn't do that. He says, you're all going to stay here, because he realized that by them having babies, they're taking his energy out. But he's thinking, I might as well, why should I just kick them out and then they won't be able to do that for me? I might as well make a profit. I'll swallow them. They want to swallow me, I'll swallow them. See? I'll stop them from having the babies, but I'll enslave them. When Pharaoh sees that his plan for birth control doesn't work, he thought by enslaving the men and making them separate, they're not going to be able, the men and women won't be able to be together, they won't be able to have babies. But it didn't work, because God is always one step ahead. And the miracle continued, and the babies were being born. What happened? So Pharaoh is panicking. What is this next thing he does? He says, all the Jewish males, throw them in the Nile River. Why is he putting these babies in the river? Why not somewhere else? I don't know, another way of killing them. Why is he throwing them in the Nile River? It seems to be a little bit of a gory way to do things. And also, if he's looking to hide his atrocities, this is very public. Throwing old babies, it's like the most hard. I can imagine that even in that world over there must have been some newspaper. And word gets out, that would be like, come on. Like Iran looks bad now of butchering its citizens by the protest. Imagine taking babies and throwing them into a river. This is like... Okay, the world didn't protest because it was Jewish babies, but okay. But it's still, you at least don't want to. But there is a deeper reason. We extracted remember, where are the sparks? What did we say? The sparks were in the river. We extracted them from the river. So in order to, what does Pharaoh want to do? He wants to replace them back right into the river. So we're taking them out of the river. He's putting them back in the river. You understand? That's the fight. In the end, Israel wins. It's brutal. It costed us much death, misery, suffering, pain, but the extraction was done. And Israel is ready to leave Egypt with an enormous amount of wealth. But who's the last one that they're holding on to? Joseph. Because they say, okay, we're letting the Jews go, but we're not going to let Joseph go. A corpse. Not a living being, a corpse. Fast forward 3,500 years later, same story. We finished elevating everything. Everything is done. Moshiach is ready. They have no choice. They have to give back all the hostages. And they're holding on to one corpse. And the very week of Parshas Beshalach, when it says that the Jewish people took Yosef and left and said, goodbye, Egypt, it's exactly then when we got the last hostage back. And let me remind you, just like Joseph, when they put him in jail first, he came out of jail. Yosef gets out of the clutches of Egypt twice, once in his lifetime and once after his death. In his lifetime, he gets out of the clutches of Egypt. When? After 12 years being in jail. But the Torah emphasizes Vayhi Miketz Shenasayim Yamim. It was in the end of 2 years. Exactly 2 years from when he asked the butler to remember him, and the butler forgot about him. 2 years later, Paro was dreaming, and Yosef gets out of prison. Miketz Shenasayim Yamim. So what happened this year with all the hostages? When did they come out of prison? Exactly 2 years after they were taken into captivity. I mean, you're not seeing the correlations. This is crazy. It's crazy. They were taken into captivity. As this last and final grab of the klipah happened when? On the day of Shmini Atzeres. For those of you who don't know, Shmini Atzeres is Yosef's day. Is Joseph's day. Because we know the 3 pilgrimage holidays, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Pesach is Keneged Avram, corresponds to Abraham. Shavuot corresponds to Yitzchak. Yaakov is Sukkot, for Yaakov Nasa Sukkot, so Yaakov travels to Sukkot. And Shmini Atzeret is the end of Sukkot, it's its own holiday, corresponds to Yosef, as the Zohar says. So remember, Yosef is the one who's in captivity, and 2 years later he comes out. On Shmini Atzeres, they grabbed hostages to the day Hoshana Rabbah, which is the day before Shmini Atzeret, but it's mind blowing. 20 living hostages came out. Now remember, when they try taking Joseph, and when they're trying to take, it means they're trying to drag the Shekhinah into exile. So I spoke about this already a few months ago. The Shekhinah comes out of exile. Whenever there are 10 Jews together, the Shekhinah dwells there. That's called a minyan, a quorum. You can't say anything of holiness that requires a special degree of holiness without 10 male Jews over bar mitzvah, over 13 years old. These last 20 hostages that came out of Shana Rabbah, all of them were male, and there were 20 of them. And why 20? Which means there was 2 times Shekhinah. Because mystically, I gave a whole class on it, I don't want to go into it right now. Mystically, 10, there are 2 levels of the Shekhinah, the lower Shekhinah and the higher Shekhinah. Both of them go out of exile on Hoshana Rabbah, according to the Arizal. That's the reason why on the lulav we remove 2 rings. On the lulav, there are rings that hold the lulav, and on that day, Hoshana Rabbah, before we shake, we remove 2 rings representing the 2 levels of Shekhinah that exit the exile. So it says in the writings of Ari. And this is crazy. On that day, 20 living hostages leave. And there's one lingering until Yud Shvat. Not Yud Shvat, Zayin Shvat. Within 3 days of Yud Shvat. So someone sent me a message and I thought, wow. In our generation, tonight's the yahrtzeit of the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, whose name is Yosef, who spiritually and mystically corresponds to Yosef HaTzadik. He's the same energy as Yosef. His name is Yosef. He's the 6th Rebbe of Chabad, just like Yosef is considered the 6th of the 7 powerful, biblical, collective souls, corresponding to the 7 Sephirot, 7 attributes of God. Abraham is kindness, Isaac is might, Jacob is beauty and compassion, Moses is victory, netzach, and perseverance, Aaron the high priest is glory, Joseph is foundation, which is the 6th, and the 7th is Malchut, King David. The 7 Chabad Rebbes correspond to these 7 Sephirot, as the Rebbe himself discussed. The 6th one, his name was Joseph, and everything in his life follows Joseph. Joseph was thrown into prison. Joseph went down to Egypt. The previous Rebbe was in prison. Previous Rebbe was the first one to come to America, as we discussed in the earlier classes, to lift. Every single thing that the lives are incredibly aligned with each other. It's like a reoccurrence of these tzaddikim. So on Simchat Torah, which is the 2nd day of Shmini Atzeret, so it's still part of the holiday of Shmini Atzeret, on Simchas Torah in 41, 42, 43, I'm not sure which one of these years, the previous Rebbe announces, listen to this is bone-chilling. On Simchat Torah, he makes an announcement that he wants to start writing a special Torah to greet Moshiach with that Torah. Here is a tzaddik who's taking Mashiach's coming very seriously, to the point that he's going to prepare a Torah that we will walk with this Torah to greet Mashiach. So he begins after Simchas Torah. First he says, I really could have done this myself, but because of Avas Yisrael, because of love your fellow Jew, I want to share the opportunity with others as well, so everybody can be part of it. People can buy and pay money and be part of it. He could have done it himself, but he doesn't want to. And they look for the best in Israel. They sent to find the best parchment and the highest quality and the best sofer. They start writing the Torah. For whatever reason, the project comes to a halt and it's not finished. For about close to about 30 years. In 1970, and it's not like we couldn't finish it. What does it take? Every day people write Torahs. It doesn't take so much to write a Torah. It wasn't that there wasn't funding, even though that time was very poor and they needed money for other things. But still, there was for something as important like this that can hasten the redemption. Of course, you can find the funding. This wasn't the issue. did not proceed. I don't know how far they got at that time, but they started writing, but they didn't finish. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, without anybody being forewarned about this, the Rebbe announced, the seventh Rebbe, right before Yud Shvat, 1970, before Yud Shvat, we're going to complete that Torah. And on the day before Yud Shvat, they completed that Torah. No, on Yud Shvat, the night of Yud Shvat, for the Yud Shvat was Friday, the night, they made the siyum of that special Sefer Torah to greet Moshiach. It was an amazing event. So what do we see from here? An event that Yosef starts on Simchas Torah, concludes on Yud Shvat. Now you can, goes from Simchas Torah to Yud Shvat. Now the whole saga of the hostages began on Simchas Torah, October 7th. And how long did the hostage situation last? Until the day before, 2 days before Yud Shvat. There's a parallel over here. Now this person who sent me this thing, I told him, you don't mind me making a thing about this. He said, no, I know, yeah, that's why I'm sharing it with you. This final hostage, his name we said before is Ran, which we said is 250. We discussed that earlier. And his last name is Gevili. Gevili is literally the word that means a parchment. We can read it, Gevil Shali, my parchment. Interesting. The Sefer Torah to greet Mashiach is corresponding with the hostages coming out the same time slot. I find that to be not coincidental. What I'm saying is there's great mysteries going on. There's awesome things happening in front of our eyes. So the first hostages come out, not the first, but the last chunk of hostages come out exactly 2 years, just like Yosef, to the day. But Joseph himself, there's like a lingering thing, and it finishes on Yud Shvat. To this day. This is awesome. Okay. This is all the introduction to the class. Now, wow. Now we're going to talk about the portion of, see, once Gaza now has lost the Palestinians in Gaza, Hamas and all the collaborators with Hamas in Gaza, which is, I can't say all of them, but there's probably at least 85% of them are in cahoots with Hamas, have lost their power. The extra edge that they've had by holding on to something Jewish. And remember, they've been holding on to something Jewish for the last 214 years. Once they lose that power, there's nothing there. So maybe on the surface you don't see a difference. It looks the same like it looked yesterday, but there's no power there. There's no staying power. It's time for Gaza to be turned into what it was always meant to be. Now we're hearing all kinds of talk suggested by the President of the United States that they're making a peace board, and that peace board is going from a bunch of foreign nations, and they're all going to kind of be the board governing Gaza, like they're going to oversee the Gaza thing. So what I'm saying is, you can plan from today till tomorrow because God has different plans. I don't know God's plans, but I do know what it does say in the book of Ezekiel about that particular land. You know something about Gaza very interesting? It was always trouble for the Jewish people. From its earliest history, the Jews always had problems with the Philistines. Gaza was never an easy place. Samson, Shimshon HaGibor was waging war over there. It was toxic. But let's find out why it's such in Hebrew it's called Aza. Aza means Az. Az means firm. That means it's the firmest klipot, the firmest powers of unholiness are etched in that place. But we know that from the greatest darkness comes the greatest light. I'm going to share with you a mind-blowing secret about the real story of Gaza. The greatest darkness becomes the greatest light because, just wait and hear what that land is destined to be in the days of Moshiach, which is coming upon us right now. I take you all to the end of the book of Ezekiel, Perek Memhe. So over there, literally from the beginning of chapter 45 in Ezekiel, it opens up about Pilchem Esa'aretz Benachla, when you will talk about the future, the vision of the land of Israel. In the beginning of the book of Ezekiel, God shows Ezekiel the vision of the third temple, and with all the measurements, exactly how it should be made and so on and so forth. But in the end of the book, he talks about the land of Israel. And in chapter 45, he speaks about a certain section that is given an allotted portion for everything within the land. There is a 50-mile by 50-mile square plot, which is going to be the most holiest place of the land of Israel, which that's the land which is going to include the temple, the holy temple, the city of Jerusalem, and also huge areas where the Kohanim will live and the Levites will live. And that's called the teruma, the portion. That's what it starts with. And it's going to tell you exactly how that area called the teruma is divided into three parts. One strip for the temple and the Kohanim. They all live in this strip of land. It's a piece of land that is 50 miles long and 20 miles wide. Okay, 20 miles by 50 miles is the area where the temple will be, not the city of Jerusalem. It's very interesting. In the future days, Jerusalem, the temple will not be in the city of Jerusalem. Because the temple is so holy, we can't have the city being next to it. The city is going to be moved off to a distance. There will be the temple. The only ones that will be residential area in the area of the temple itself will be the Kohanim. A portion that is given to the priests. They will have to be living in very, very high level holiness, and they will live within this portion. Then there's a strip beneath it, which will be the Levite portion. That's where only Levites will be, and they will be supporting the Temple Mount and the temple service. It's also 50 miles in width, 20 miles in 50 miles in length and 20 miles in width. Then there will be the third part of this area called teruma. It's all part of the teruma, the portion allotted to God. The third part is around 10 miles wide, 50 miles long. So the length doesn't change, but it's half the size of the other. That's where the city of Jerusalem will be. And other Jews will be allowed to live there, not just Kohanim and Leviim. But this is not part of the land that is given to the individual tribes. This is in general. This whole area is in general God's place. Okay, that's what it starts with. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take you back and I'm going to reveal to you something absolutely crazy, stunning. And that is as follows. If you look and read further in chapter 48, Perek Memches, It gives you the portions of how Israel will be divided to all the tribes. We find out in the book of Ezekiel that the land of Israel is going to be divided very differently than it did when we went in with Joshua. There, every portion for each tribe was different size, and they were all over the land. Different part here, different way, and each one had its own size according to the size of the tribe. In the future, in the days of Moshiach, Israel is going to be divided into 13 equal strips of land. Every strip of land is going to run from from west to east. That's going to be the long side. On the western border runs the Mediterranean. On the eastern border goes into the desert, and it doesn't say where the end is, and could be, it can grow and grow based on the need. People will have a lot of children and will need more space. You can extend it as far as you want to the east into the desert. So we're not going to be concerned of how long each strip is. The main question is, how wide is each strip? Going from north to south. Because the length is a strip like this, east to west, and then the north from south to north. So on that, all the strips are equal. The Torah, I'll tell you what the size is. It's 50 miles each strip. How do we get to 50 miles? I'll break it down for you, how we got to 50 miles. Basically, what you're getting over here is 13 strips, eastern from north to south, the width, and 13 are like divided. I'll give you a picture of it. You can see it over here. I'll show it first over here. These strips that are coming over here, each strip like this, and you have the names of the tribes over here. So these are a strip of land. Now, the lowest strip, meaning most southern, is all the way by the Nile, by where Eilat is today. Okay? Like all the way down at the south of Israel, where Eilat. And then, that's the first strip, and then on top of it is another and another and another. I think the lowest strip is the tribe of Gad. They'll be all the way down next to Egypt. Then on top of it, another one and another one, until you go all the way north. The northernmost is to the tribe of Dan. That's the tippy top of Israel. And it goes much farther than the north of Israel today. Much farther north. It includes all of Syria. And probably into Turkey. That's how far it goes. To give you a little bit of an understanding in terms of mileage, the size of Israel right now at its longest point is between 263 to 290 miles. Israel, when you count these 13 strips, 50 miles each strip, so you have to make it 13 times 50 is at least 650 miles. So it's going to be almost 3 times the size, the length of Israel than it is now, from north to south. Cool. And the way it is that Dan is on the top, and then I think Naphtali, and then each. And again, the length of it goes from the water. The truth is, up there, I'm not sure there's water anymore, but it goes out like that to the desert, like this. These strips, 50-50. Now the question is, there's only 12 tribes. How do you get 13? So the 13th strip is, one strip belongs to Mashiach himself, to the Nasi, to Mashiach. That strip of land exists between the tribe of Yehuda and the tribe of Binyamin. That means on the top, up north, on top of of Mashiach's private strip of land. On top of him is the tribe of Yehuda. Below him, beneath him, more south, is the tribe of Binyamin, Benjamin. Judah and Benjamin. And in the middle is the Nasi. Now, the Nasi Mashiach has an equal plot of land, estate, as large as the state of every single tribe. Explicitly stated in the book of Yechezkel. The reason we give him such a big lot is because God does not want anymore the Nasi to take advantage of the people and steal their lands, like happened in the past. So he says, I'm going to give you like so much land, you'll be able to have 60 golf courses. Or whatever Mashiach is going to want to do with his land. Okay? Now what's interesting to note is how about the Temple Mount? Where is that? So in the past, the Temple Mount, and in the past, the Nasi, Mashiach, the leader, did not have any of this. There was no, he lived in Jerusalem, he lived there, but there was no special allotted portion to him. So where was the temple? The temple was between Judah and Benjamin. Yehuda and Benjamin had land right next to each other. And the temple was, most of it was on the portion of Judah, and part of it went into Benjamin's portion. Part of the altar was sitting on the border between Yehuda and Binyamin. In the future, in the days of Mashiach, Binyamin is going to be moved over way south. Judah is going to be moved over north. We're going to insert a piece of land, an area which belongs to Mashiach, and part of his portion, in the middle of his portion, so you got this long stretch of land, in the middle of his portion is going to be this special holy area that we discussed earlier, where the upper part will be the temple and the Kohanim residence. That's the most northern part. The down south will be the Levites. Bordering that on the south will be the Levite portion. Bordering that on the south to that will be the portion of the city and some people who will get to live there. I don't know how they will get to live there. That's going to be, but all of that is cut out from Mashiach's personal estate. So you're going to say, well, what's left to Mashiach? What's his presence? Oh, a lot. And I'm going to show you a picture, so you'll understand a little better what I'm saying. Here you have just the portion that belongs to the Nasi. You can see it over here. I don't know how well you're seeing it from, I'm sorry, over here is what I have to show it. So it's this area over here, this whole area, is the portion of the Nasi. Inside over here, it's not so strongly highlighted. Inside over here, cut out in the middle, is this, again, in order to understand this better, you have a 50-mile piece of land from south to north that is the private domain of Mashiach. But from east to west, it could go 100 miles, 150 miles. It goes as far as the rest of the tribe's lands will go into the east. So it goes pretty far. The Torah does not give a limited measurement to how far it can go. So you have, let's imagine it's 50 miles by 100 miles in length. Inside the 50 inside this piece, cut out a piece of land 50 by 50, which that Mashiach donates to the temple, to the Kohanim, to the Levites. It leaves him land to the east and to the west, because this piece of land cut out is not all the way to the west, it's not all the way to the east, it's in the middle. So it leaves him a nice chunk of land from that cutout portion to the water, to the Mediterranean. And on the other side, it leaves him a lot of land on the two sides of Jerusalem. Okay. I just want to, for a moment, give you where I took the numbers, and so no one should think that I'm just making up bagaloni over here. I just want to tell you how we got the measurements, because these measurements are very accurate. The Torah says, when it gives you the measurements of these portions, each strip should be 25,000 reeds, kanim, reeds. 25,000 kanim. These strips that I spoke about earlier, strip, which I said is 50 miles. 25,000 kanim. Kan is a reed, which in the measurements of Yechezkel, each reed is 6 amot, 6 cubits long. So if you make 25,000 times 6, you get that number. Whatever that number is, 150,000 cubits. According to, there's an argument amongst the Poskim, how much is a cubit in terms of feet? But we're using Ramosha Feinstein's measurement, who says every cubit is 21 inches. That means 1.75 foot, almost 2 feet, but not exactly 2 feet, a little less. 24 inches would be 2 feet, so it's 21 inches. So I made 21 times 150,000, which gives you how many inches there are. Then I divided that by 12 to get you how many feet there are, whatever number I came. Then I checked how many, I put that into Google or AI and asked, so many feet, how many miles is this? And literally the amount is 49 miles, 0.75. So it's literally a tiny bit less than 50 miles. Each strip is 50 miles. That's how we got to it. Okay? Now, if you do those measurements and you start, and you know exactly where it starts. It stops by the all the way down by Egypt, by Eilat, and the Torah says exactly the bottom point. If you measure in today's measurements and you go up 50 miles, 50 miles, 50 miles, going up north, you can figure out exactly where the strip of Moshiach is. And you'll get that Jerusalem today is inside that strip. That's where Jerusalem is, in the middle of it. Hebron is also in that strip. Hebron is actually going to come out to be in the portion of the Levites. The Kohan in Jerusalem, the portion of the future, the portion of the Beis HaMikdash sits on top of Hebron. Hebron is going to be in the portion of the Levites, and then the city of Jerusalem actually comes out then below Hebron, which is very interesting. But now, here's the cool thing. If you continue and you go down to the west on the strip of Mashiach, you're going to find out that the entire area that's Gaza is Mashiach's personal property. Most of Gaza City, most of northern Gaza, maybe a little bit of Gaza sticks out beneath it, but most of the area of Gaza is Mashiach's personal property. So Donald Trump has no right on it. Neither do whoever thinks they're going to have any kind of say, Turkey, Erdogan, or whatever. He should be starting to think about his land that's going to be part of Israel. And all these other people who think they're the big shots over there deciding of that portion of land, forget about it, because this is Mashiach's personal property. And now we can understand that it was always such a contentious land because there's such power in this area. Again, and that is to the west of where the temple and all the holy area called the Teruma is going to be. Now I want to conclude over here and share with you something stunning, because all of this explains a story that is connected to Yud Shvat that I'm going to conclude with, which I believe is a mind-blowing story. I shared it once on a class, but until now, without this piece of information, this story doesn't seem to make any sense, but it's an astounding story. The story is that in 1978, There was a Chassid, his name was Rebbe Zusha Rifkin. He lived in Kfar Chabad. And he was a gabbai in a shul called Beis Menachem. You can go, Kfar Chabad is a small village next to Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. You can look up Kfar Chabad, you can read the history. It's a Chabad village. Chabad Hasidim live in that village. It's Chabad really headquarters in Israel. It was initially inhabited in 1949 by Russian immigrants, by Chabad Hasidim who came up to Israel, and it was a farmland. It was an agricultural farm. Now, it used to be an Arab village. When Israel won the War of Independence in 1948, the Arabs have cleared the area from that whole area. This is not far from Tel Aviv. The Arabs all vacated on their own. The reason they vacated was because the invading armies from Jordan, from all around that invaded in 1948, told the Arabs that we want to go in there and create a bloodbath. We want to kill all the Jews. If you're going to be there, it's going to make it tough for us. So everybody leave so that you can leave us the space and we can attack. So all these villages all over Israel, which had many Arabs living there, all left. And then it didn't work exactly like they thought it would work, because they thought they will obliterate the Jewish army like this. And God's miracles happened that the Jewish people won the independence war in 1948. Suddenly, all these villages were now empty, and they needed to civilize. It's not good to have empty land. They needed to immediately get the country going. So they were giving it to various different organizations, Jewish organizations. They gave away these villages that they can bring their people in and build the land up. So there was a famous later who became a person in Israel, a big politician. His name was Shazar Shneir Zalman. What was his last name? Rubovich. I forgot his last name. Later became the president of Israel. And he came from a Chabad family. And he had the highest respects for Chabad, his ancestry. He himself was not religious, but at that time he wasn't president yet, but he reached out to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, then the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. He told at that time the government in Israel, why not give a piece of land to Chabad? Because Chabad, they'll bring their people in. We want to encourage Aliyah from everybody. We need a civil. And they agreed to give Lubavitch a parcel of land that they should cultivate. They brought a map to the previous Rebbe of various different villages, and the previous Rebbe put his finger down and chose this one. He wanted this one. Before this, the Arab village, it was called something that means sapphire. Sapphire. You can look. I looked at today in Wikipedia. It gives you the name of the Arab village, what it was before it became Kfar Chabad. And then the previous Rebbe encouraged his Chassidim to settle in this village and start to create a Chabad civilization in Russia, in the land of Israel. And now there's about close to, 10,000 people that live there in this village. So in that village, there is a shul, many different Chabad institutions. One of them is a shul. And this is a shul that the Hasidim got permission from the Rebbe to make it in the Rebbe's name. The Rebbe never allowed any institutions to be using his name. He always had it in the names of his ancestors, of others, not of his own. This was the first institution the Rebbe allowed that they should name it for his name. They asked the Rebbe if they can call it Beis Menachem, and the Rebbe gave permission. When the shul was completed, they were so excited. The Hasidim said, if we have a shul with the Rebbe's name, Hasidim, they boil over a little. They get overly excited. Like you see, I get a little excited over here too. And they decided to send the Rebbe an invitation to come move to Israel. And that he should come move and he should reveal himself as Moshiach. Hasidim believed very strongly that the Rebbe has all the qualifications of Moshiach, even in 1978. This did not start in 1990. And the Hasidim believed the Rebbe, and they literally sent the Rebbe a letter, and they asked the Rebbe, they didn't ask, a Chassid asked the Rebbe if they sent him an invitation or whatever. They asked that the Rebbe should come to Israel and that he should move there and come and reveal himself as Moshiach. The Rebbe said to the Chassidim at that time, I want to have it in writing. So the Chassidim made an emergency meeting in Kfar Chabad, and they went to the mikveh, like before you write to the Rebbe, and they wrote a letter, and there were like over, I don't know how many, hundreds of Chassidim signed the invitation, in which they openly referred to the Rebbe as Moshiach, and they said to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, come to the land of Israel and settle. And Reb Zusha Rifkin brought this letter to the Rebbe, and he handed the Rebbe over this invitation. The Rebbe went, listen to the story, and he took out a pack, I think, of 1,200 single dollar bills. He gave it to Zusha, and he said to Zusha, give every person who signed on this letter, thank you. Every person whose signature on the letter, give him $1 of blessing from me. Thank you. And the Rebbe said, the Rebbe said, a lot of people will want to sign now. No, don't give anybody only those who signed before. Whoever's going to want to sign now, doesn't. These are the words the Rebbe said. Whoever's going to want to sign now, God will give them from his open hands all the blessings. But these dollars, only for those who were the original signers. All right? I think there wasn't enough dollars. Reb Zusha went back and the Rebbe gave him another chunk. Altogether, the Rebbe gave him $1,800. He didn't have 1,800 signatures, so he had quite a stash left over. He asked the Rebbe, what should I do with those extra dollars? The Rebbe said, you'll do with it good things. So far, he didn't tell him what. So he put away all those dollars on the side. Soon after this story, he comes back to Israel and he's thinking. The Rebbe did not, we gave him the invitation. He didn't tell us no. It seems like things are going good. Well, if he comes to Israel, where's he going to live? He needs a place. So this Zusha had an idea. He said, why don't we build the Rebbe a house in Kfar Chabad? That was his thought. Let's build the Rebbe a house in Kfar Chabad. Should he want to come, I'll have where to live. He thought his idea was great. So he wanted to, and it happened to be that he wasn't traveling. It wasn't easy, 1970, and everybody's traveling every day back from Israel to New York. He had this thought, but he figured, and his brother's name was Hayam, and he said to Hayam, his brother, you're going to New York now. You're going to be by the Rebbe. You're going to be in a private. Tell the Rebbe in my name that I'm inviting, that I want to build him a house, if I have permission to build him a house. So Reb Chaim said, okay. And when he was in New York, and he had a private audience with the Rebbe, he said to the Rebbe, in Yiddish, my brother Zusha will boyen for the Rebbe a shtub, wants to build for the Rebbe a house. The Rebbe looks at him, and the Rebbe says, a shtub? He wants to build me a house? An armon, a palace. That's what the Rebbe said. An armon, the Rebbe made with his hands. An armon, a palace. Aber the Rebbe says, aber nicht wie, I think the words were, aber nicht wie es ist. It's there, not the way it is now. Der Weile warten. Meanwhile, he should wait. In other words, we're not ready for it right now. But the idea is a good idea. But the Rebbe said, a house? Why a house? A palace. Interesting. Zusha got this letter. He got this answer. He was ecstatic. He was like, a palace. He right away started talking and getting an idea of how, what, speaking to architects. Anyways, but he sent in, I think there was some correspondence immediately in 1978, but the Rebbe strongly told him to wait with it. And he couldn't do anything for many years. Because every time he asked, he always kept on being told, no, no, no. So this is going on for from 1978 till 1992, about 14 years. In 1992, there is a conference for women in New York on the Rebbe's wife's yahrtzeit, on the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka's day of passing, which is the 22nd day of Shvat. So women, today's days as well, we know that's the time of the women's conference from Chabad emissaries all over the world. The wife of this Reb Zusha, his wife's name is Naomi Rifkin, was in New York participating in this conference. At the conclusion of the conference, the women had a yechidus. Yechidus means a audience, so to speak, with the Rebbe. But in those days, the Rebbe wasn't doing private audiences, only with groups. So all the women, they were together, or the groups from Israel. I'm not exactly sure who was part of the group. At the end, each woman went by, and the Rebbe gave $1 for each woman. This Naomi Rivkin goes by, and she says to the Rebbe, Zusha, my husband, wants to know if he can start building the palace. The Rebbe shockingly answers, ask a rabbi in Israel. Fregen Arav in Eretz HaKodesh. Those were the exact words from the Rebbe. She should ask, or he should ask, a rabbi in the land of Israel. She immediately telephones her husband, tells him the Rebbe's answer, because the first time he got a different answer of just wait. He immediately didn't waste any time, goes to the rabbi of Kfar Chabad, his name is Mordechai Ashkenazi, and he says to him about the story with the palace, and he says, the Rebbe said to ask a Rav, a rabbi, a halachic authority. I'm asking you. The rabbi hears this, and the rabbi says, wow. The rabbi gives not only permission, he says it should be done joyfully, and it should be with tremendous success, and they should start doing it, and he gave huge blessings. He immediately calls his wife, she's still in New York, and he tells her that the rabbi gave blessings for the thing. So we got the answer. So the following Sunday, you can watch a video on this, she herself goes by the Rebbe and says to the Rebbe, but the Rebbe would, see people, and people, you can say usually a word or two. She says to the Rebbe, Zusha, my husband, asked by Rav Ashkenazi, and told him about building the Armon, the palace. And Rav Ashkenazi said that we should do it. We gave a bracha, natzlach, and should do it besimcha, with joy. So the Rebbe gives her $1, and the Rebbe says, Ton vider Rav ad gehest. They should do like the rabbi says. Or Ton vider Rav zakt, or something like that. They should do like the rabbi. Armed with this, she has now permission finally to build the palace. She calls her husband. He immediately calls together a meeting with all the vad. These are the decision makers in Kfar Chabad, and says, the Rebbe says we should build a structure, this palace. So we need a piece of land. Where are we going to build it? So they take out a map, an aerial map of the entire Kfar, and they looked at different locations, and they came up with 3 possible locations. They marked it. Zusha hops onto a plane, goes to New York, lands, and he's there Friday morning. He landed early Friday. Friday morning, 10 o'clock, he's standing outside the Rebbe's room. The Rebbe walks out to daven Shachris. Zusha standing with the map, and he gives the Rebbe, and he says, whatever, this is the 3 possibilities of making the thing. And the Rebbe gives him a big smile. The Rebbe gives him $1, and the Rebbe says, this is you should have parnasa, for livelihood. The Rebbe takes the map and fartik. A few hours later, Rabbi Groner, the Rebbe's secretary, comes to call Zusha, and he says there's an answer. And there's a copy of the answer where I think it's the Rebbe's handwriting itself, where the Rebbe chooses one of the locations of where it should be made. Eitzel Agudas Chasidei Chabad. If you find out about the Kfar Chabad, you find out that they made a replica of 770, the World Chabad headquarters of Brooklyn, of a building. The exact same replica is a building in Kfar Chabad. So the Rebbe says next to that building. He chose one of the places. Reb Zusha went, and now he needs an architect. He meets with everything I'm telling you now is clearly documented, and there's interviews with all these people, where they relating firsthand what happened. And there are the documents, there are the letters, there are the signatures, the Rebbe's correspondence, videos of these encounters with the Rebbe giving the blessings. No one made this up. This is a crazy story. Reb Zusha now goes to meet with a very high known architect. His name was Zev Marginit, and he sits with him at night, and he shows him tells him about the idea of a palace. Now, this guy's did an architecture job, not really built a palace, so it was like a new to him. And he said, okay. And they said l'chaim. He took, oh wait, I forgot. When Zusha was in New York, that Shabbos, right after he passed the Rebbe the map, that Shabbos, during the Farbrengen, the Rebbe took a bottle of vodka, a bottle of mashke, it's called, and the Rebbe would give it to various different people, these bottles. The Rebbe had always, by every Farbrengen, like a whole case of these bottles, and he would give them to people who would then use them for events that they were making all over the world for the development of all the institutions. So if you opened the new yeshiva, whatever, you got a bottle for all the participants as kind of they drank from the Rebbe's blessed bottle, it would be blessings. So the Rebbe gave Zusha a bottle, and the Rebbe said, this is for the groundbreaking. So the Rebbe is encouraging it. This is for the groundbreaking on the new. Zusha then asked the Rebbe after Shabbos, he sends in a note to the Rebbe, when should we do the groundbreaking? And number two, should we do it? No, first he asked, I think, or should we do it? When we do it, should we make a big publicity all over Israel, put it in the newspapers, a groundbreaking on a palace that we're building, or not? The Rebbe answered both answers. The first thing, when it should be done, the Rebbe said, on a Yom Depagra, on an auspicious day. Means look for an auspicious day anyways on the calendar and do it on that day. Secondly, the Rebbe said, no, don't make do it quietly. All right, he has instructions. When he comes back to Israel, he meets this Marganit, and he shows him they say l'chaim on the Rebbe's bottle, and it's by 12 o'clock at night. By the time they're finished, Zusha goes home. It was in Zusha's house. This Marganit leaves back to his house. And he thinks, and Zusha told him, please do it quickly. He said, how long can something like this take? He said, they could take, a couple of weeks to make something like this, or a few days at least. He says, yeah, please do a rush job. The next day in the morning, 7 o'clock a.m., Zusha gets a phone call from the Zev Marganit, and he says, come here, pick up your papers. It's all done. He says, what? He says, no, come. He came, he said he couldn't believe it. He sees a complete palace, all with, blueprints, all done with pencil, but... So he says to him, he said, I don't know, when I came home, I had adrenaline in me. I felt so excited. I said, I got to start working on this immediately. So I sat down with paper, with pen and paper, with a pencil, and I started drawing, and I cannot explain it. It's as if my hand was this never happened. My hand was like going all over the place, and it was drawing. By the time it was 7 a.m, my hand was done, and the picture was all done. He says, I don't know. He says, it was like a hand, it was like the Rebbe's hand. I don't know what was there that was guiding my hand in this architecture of this palace. Zusha later brought these pictures brought this ark, and the Rebbe approved it. And the Rebbe said, this answer, I forgot the wording and whatever. They actually had a groundbreaking ceremony. This happened in Shvat. So the first next Yom Depagra, the great special day, was Purim. But that year there was a double Adar, so Purim was pushed off another month. So the first Adar, which is called Purim Katan, the small Purim, 1992, they made an event. They did not publicize it all over Israel, but Chassidim heard about it, and there were quite a lot of people who came from around, and they were there at the event. And the rabbi of Kfar Chabad was there, Rabbi Ashkenazi. The elder rabbi of Kfar Chabad was an old chassid, Reb Chanzin, was also at the thing. And another chassid, his name was Reb Alta Hilowitz. Great chassidim were there. And they spoke, and it was like a whole thing, and they're giving the Rebbe's mashka, and they did the groundbreaking on that spot. And Reb Zusha, is the time it's done, he's flying high, but he's ready to go to sleep at night, and he gets a call. Rabbi Leibel Groner, the Rebbe's secretary, is on the phone. And he says, I want to know, can you give me a report on who were the rabbis who participated, and if they spoke, what they spoke, and were pictures taken? So he says, Label, yeah, Rabbi Groner, for sure. I'm going to go to sleep. I'll wake up in the morning, and I'll give you a report. Rabbi Groner says the Rebbe is on the line. The Rebbe is on the phone now. You don't go to sleep now. Tell me now. Now, the Rebbe did not usually get on the phone. That's what I'm saying. The fact that the Rebbe is on the phone, and because it was very, very dear to the Rebbe what was going on. So he immediately starts listing off which rabbis were there. When the Rebbe heard this Alter Hilowitz was there, the Rebbe was happy. The Rebbe said enough, and the rest of the report he sent in the next day, and everything is good. A week or so later, the Rebbe had a stroke, the famous stroke, and sadly, the building has not been built because there's a lot of politics got involved. I'm not going to get into it, but so far it has not been built, and it's going to be built, Be'ezrat Hashem. But one of the big questions that people had regarding then and now as well, if you're building a palace for Mashiach, why wouldn't you build a palace in Jerusalem? If I was to make a campaign to build Mashiach's palace today, I would find a nice, beautiful place next to the Waldorf Astoria, next to the Mamila Mall, and build a nice palace over there. What am I building a palace next to Tel Aviv, next to the airport? In Kfar Chabad, what is a palace for Mashiach over there? It doesn't belong there. So this is a gewaldige question. The question is only a question until you take out the book of Yechezkel and you understand what's going on over here. This whole eastern portion right next to the western portion of Mashiach's property, where I told you Gaza is down here, up here, actually the closest to the temple in the private dimension of Mashiach is exactly where Kfar Chabad is. So Kfar Chabad is in Mashiach's personal, private place, and it's actually the closest place you would be able to build, which is still in Mashiach's place, but not yet in the portion that belongs to the Kohanim. So you couldn't have had a more perfect place to build a palace for Mashiach in the private domain of Mashiach. And it also shows you that the previous Rebbe, when he put his finger down on one particular place and he chose it, didn't just choose next to Tel Aviv because he figured that in Tel Aviv there's nice kosher restaurants. The Rebbe chose the place that he knew belonged to that dynasty. With all of this, I rest my case. Leil Yud Shvat. This is huge. Let us see Moshiach now. Leil Yud Shvat.